Hey, everybody, and welcome to the first episode of Stand Up Utah. Now, I'm going to kind of get this rolling and do a little bit of introduction with Aaron and I, and then talk about what the show is going to be about, just to give you an idea of where we're at and what's going on. So, just to give a little bit of background, I met Aaron when I kind of sort of accidentally became the precinct chair at a caucus meeting because nobody else could really do it and make it to all the conventions, and so that's kind of how that got started. And I started getting more and more involved in things and started, paying attention to some of these issues. And as I've kind of gotten deeper and deeper into the ways that the parties work and stuff like that, I've really just gotten to the point where it's like, there's some stuff that we need to change, we need to work on. And anyway, I talk to other people, and they're as frustrated as I am with a lot of the things that go on, right? It seems like a lot of things are kind of going right this legislative session, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit. But, I look at things and we see now. I have to give him some credit, right? Because Mitt Romney, he is that 50th vote on a lot of stuff. But, when we're looking at it and we're thinking the Republicans in the Senate are going to cave, right? It seems like he's always one of the guys on that, in that group, right? We look at some of the things the legislature's done, right? And so like the transgender bill, was a giant fight last time. And this time it seemed like they were able to mostly get things through the way that we wanted them to go, right? The school choice thing is a big step forward, I think, and that's been a giant fight, and so we're making headway. But why does it have to be a giant fight? You look at things and you think here in Utah, we'd be able to, screw our heads on straight and get this stuff figured out. So I wanted a place where we could come. Right. Yeah. And so I wanted a place where we could come and talk about this kind of thing and talk about what's going on and really just give people a place to go where they can be aware of what's happening in Utah and in the places that we are. And instead of covering the national news, so like I listen to Glenn Beck and Ben Shapiro and some of those other folks, and what I find is that they're often talking about a lot of the same things, and then when I really think about it, I realize that I don't know that there's anything I can do about it. And so then I look at the issues here in Utah, right, and I can call up my House representative. I can call up my senator. I can organize a bunch of other people. We can go up to Salt Lake. I actually took my daughter last year to the March for Life, right? And so there are a lot of things that we can be doing that put us in a position to make a difference, right? And I think if we get organized and we're paying attention to these things, we can change the trajectory of a lot of the things that I've already mentioned. Maybe we can get rid of Mitt Romney. Maybe we can, put somebody in who's better as governor, right? Maybe we can turn over more school board seats, which is another big win that we had this last midterm election, right? And so, and if it's not that, then it's maybe I can support Pro-Life Utah, or maybe I can support, some of the Utah Parents United, or, some of the other groups out there that are working on some of the problems I see, but I just don't know how to get involved. And the other thing is I would love to get a whole bunch of people to show up at the caucus meeting in 2 years and really change the shape of the delegates. So I guess I organized my thoughts and then I just kind of rambled. But let me just kind of go down my list real quick of the reasons, and then I'll let you introduce yourself, Aaron. Okay. But yeah, so ultimately, I think a lot of our issue is that anybody can run as a Republican, right? You register as a Republican, you can run as a Republican. You and I have both run for public office, right? And yeah, you just check the boxes, right? You pay the fee and you're on the ballot. And not all the candidates are good. Right? Yeah, right? So not all the candidates are good candidates. Not all of the candidates are candidates that are going to represent the values we have. And I just want a place where we can come and we can talk about those values and talk about the issues and help people know what to do so that we can get more people in that make the difference there. And then I don't want to talk about the stuff that all the talking heads on the syndicated shows are talking about. Like sometimes it'll bleed into Utah, right? And what are we going to do about it? And we can support local politicians who will stand up to it. But I'm not interested in talking about document scandals and stuff because there's nothing we can do to change that.
Do you have any documents in your garage right now, Charles?
I double checked. I do have some campaign signs from a school board run, but that's about it. So
I have some of my campaign signs too.
Yeah, I have a lot of those.
City council, but
yeah. So the other issue that I see, and I haven't talked so much about this, but I've talked to a lot of people that said I left the Republican Party because nothing's going to change. And I feel like what happens is there's a steady stream of people that come in, they try, they get disenfranchised, and then they fall out the bottom. And if we can get some of those people to come back and we can continue to build the ranks and then give people the perspective, hey, look, we're not going to be able to change this overnight in one election cycle. But if we continually work on it, then we get to the point where we can pass bills like the ones that I talked about earlier. So that's the other thing. And so I want to focus on the Utah news, the Utah stuff, the stuff we can change, the stuff we can make a difference on. I am looking at starting a national show, but it's going to have a completely different focus, and it's also going to be on what we can change, what we can do, right? If it's not something that we can really make an impact on, then I probably won't cover it.
This is actionable stuff, right? This isn't just your average listen to what's going wrong in the world and be upset about it type broadcast, right?
Okay. Yeah, and that's ultimately what makes us different, in my opinion, from some of the other shows out there. Because I like Rod Arquette. I listen to Political as Heck with Corey. Is it Astle? Yeah, and so, but they delve a lot into those national issues, and they delve a lot into these things that are outrageous, and ultimately not something that we can make a difference on right now. And so, rather than cover that, I just want to go deep on a topic. Hey, look, this is the issue. These are the things that are going on. This is what's feeding into it. Here's what we can do about it. Here are the steps you can take in 20 minutes or so of your week. And then we can move the needle on these issues, right? And then if several things come up, then I imagine that we could just get on and say, look, we talked about, I don't know, the state budget or something, right? Something in the state budget. We talked about schools, funding schools. And there's some other bill that's coming up that's important. So you and I get on and we just cover it in 5 to 10 minutes and just say, hey, look, here's what you need to know and here's what you need to do. And that way we can give people timely stuff, but still help people understand what's going on and what they can do to make a difference. So that's what I want to do. And so we may go deep on a legislative bill that's coming through the legislature, right? And we may get into the weeds on it. But at the end of the day, then it's, okay, now that you understand the issue, here's how you talk to your your representative or your senator about it, right? And then the next time we may have some organization that's making a difference somewhere.
Yeah, and ultimately there's so much to cover. I was counting up my priority bills that I'm tracking this session, and there's 64 of them, which it's not the 500 bills that have been numbered so far, but it's still a lot, right?
Yeah.
And if you think about how often those are coming up for a vote in Utah during the legislative session, there's always something to be doing, whether or not you agree with my position on something or Chuck's position on something, or if you oppose it, there's always something that you can be doing to make a difference, especially at the state level in Utah. You really do feel like you're moving the needle.
Yeah, well, and the other thing is that whether you agree with me or Aaron, or whether we both agree or disagree, the other thing is that at least you'll understand one side or both sides of the issue as we cover it, right? And so You'll be conversant with the issue. And so then if you decide to take different action from what we give you, at least you're informed.
Absolutely.
So what I'd like to do here is just, do you want to introduce yourself, let people know who you are and kind of how you got into this stuff, and then what you look at as you evaluate these kinds of things?
Yeah, so my name is Aaron Bullen, and live in the same town as Chuck here in Lehigh, just on the opposite end.
Hmm.
And similarly, I just showed up at a caucus meeting. I was nominated to be a delegate for the first time in 2016. I was actually there to vote in the presidential preference primary. If you recall, there's a lot of people who showed up for that because that was the only way to
Hmm.
vote in the presidential primary in 2016. So I absolutely was politically agnostic at the time, and the only thing that got me out of my house was, determining who the Republican nominee was. And I wasn't even that Republican. Like I had voted for, Democrats before. But anyway, you'll get why that's funny as we begin talking about some stuff now. I'm quite conservative, if I were to describe myself. Um, but yeah, I just went on from there, decided that this is really important, and it was a really great way to make a difference. Uh, since then, I've been every level of delegate in the state, and I've gotten involved with a nonprofit called Pro Life Utah, which advocates for pro life issues, but mostly we're a charity that gives money to women in need who are in crisis pregnancies and afraid and considering not keeping their baby. So we help them, and we have baby showers all the time to help out those women, and it's incredibly rewarding. So mainly my focus is the pro-life issues, but also a concentration of mine is education issues. I have a bunch of little kids who are in school, and so I want to make sure that the education system is functioning and accountable, uh, and a lot of other cultural issues that I pay attention to. That's
Yep.
kind of me in a nutshell.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So it's funny because when I met you, I thought that, well, once I really got to know you, I thought you'd been doing this for a lot longer than I have. But I was nominated as the precinct chair in 2016. And yeah, like I said, it was because I could go to both conventions. And so, at least in the Utah County Republican Party, the precinct chair is both the state um, and county delegate. And so,
That's why
anyway, I
it's
got
so
involved there.
funny when But it's so funny when people say like, "Oh, only like the party elites are part of the caucus system and voting in these conventions." I'm like,
Uh-huh.
no, I was absolutely the random guy on the street
Yep.
that showed up, got elected to a position, and turned out that I had some principles and values I was unaware of before, as
Yep.
I really began looking into some of these issues. So yeah, I am a firm believer that the caucus convention system, it's a neighborhood representation system, and it's just average people who participate, and maybe they care enough to show up and go to a political convention all day, but besides that, they're just average people.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely. And yeah, so, and I was in kind of the same boat. I mean, by then I was kind of listening to some of the nationally syndicated folks and had formed some opinions on some stuff. But the other reason I went was that I kept seeing people get elected to things, and then I'm just like, why are we electing these people if they're not going to represent us? And so I was like, well, I can go to the caucus meeting and get involved that way, and that in that way, maybe I can help be a vote to head off some of these people and help get the good folks in. And I was a little naive in the way that I thought about that because I didn't understand how it all worked. But at the end of the day, yeah, I mean, if you get enough of the right people in the caucus meetings, you really can change the shape of the race. And so I got involved there,
Absolutely.
and then got involved kind of at the legislative district level. I've helped out with some other stuff. I ran for school board. I'm not currently on the school board for my kids' charter school, but that was after 10 and a half years of being on the school board or on the board for the charter school. So, um, I'm very involved in education. I've been involved in a lot of other community things like Boy Scouts and stuff like that. And I see what is coming, and honestly, it is frightening. But then you see people stand up to it and realized that if we can give more people the tools to stand up, that's where a lot of the difference is made. And
So
so,
that's kind of a
yeah.
nice segue into one of the major concentrations of the legislative session thus far, which was HB 215, the Ed Choice Bill,
Mm-hmm. Yep,
um,
absolutely.
which passed. It was signed by the governor, which, there's been quite a few things signed by the governor thus far, which are fairly surprising. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
Mostly because in the past he has opposed these things. Last year he opposed the Ed Choice initiative.
Mm-hmm.
But by the end of last legislative session, I opposed the Ed Choice bill because it had so many strings attached. But um, this, this this year it was a lot better form. There was a lot more autonomy built into the bill and a lot more
Mm-hmm.
separation of homeschool. So I ended up liking it. But there's actually a lot of people, on the conservative side who really dislike it. Uh, Obviously, a lot of people um, who are on the left dislike it. They prefer public school,
Mm-hmm.
and don't want anyone to try to do private school or homeschool. But a lot of
Yeah.
different views on that subject.
Yep, absolutely. Well, and it's interesting too, just from the standpoint of, um, I mean, it seems like some of the usual characters came out in opposition, right? Because they always oppose it. I have to say, I saw a few people on Twitter said they're leaving the state because they basically ruined public education. I think they're overestimating the impact of this particular bill. I think for the most part, there are going to be a handful more people that choose another route, and I think most everybody else is just going to stay in the public school. I really don't think it's going to impact that unless it's not
Yeah,
working for their kids.
well, and for now, it's not. I would say it's not fully funded. I mean, it's only
Right.
funding 5,100 scholarships. Those are
Mm-hmm.
prioritized towards the low income uh,
Mm-hmm.
applications. And so, you or I, we might apply, but may not get it, the first
Right.
year or until it catches on and it's funded more. But I
Mm-hmm.
do like the start of this. I do believe that it brings more accountability to the education system. And by that, I don't mean like the regulations that are currently on public education. And there's a
Oh
lot of
yeah.
requirements for public ed that are
Uh-huh.
quite frankly annoying and useless. But I mean, when, parents are speaking up and there's
Mm-hmm.
something frustrating going on, is there any driving motivation for that school to change? And
Right.
in my experience, there's not much of that to go around. There's a whole lot more
No.
motivation for legislators to listen to how you feel and maybe vote in a certain way than there is for like a school board member to listen to how you feel and vote in a certain way, or to craft a policy that
Right.
fits your needs. So, unfortunately, that's just the case. People pay more attention to bigger races. And the races that are smaller that you think would be more accountable to the people, less people vote in those races, and less people
Yeah.
know the candidates, and so they're actually less accountable because they're
Yeah.
always going to be reelected.
Well, when I ran for school board, I mean that was absolutely the thing that I was seeing, right? Is that the people who had some concerns, they were the ones that were coming out and trying to vote candidates in that they thought would shake things up or make a difference. And then everybody else was like, "Oh, I like her. I'm going to vote for her." And I talked to all kinds of people, and that was almost word for what I got. Oh, I like so and so, and so I'm going to vote for her this time. And
Yeah, no mention of what their policy preferences are or like what they would
right,
actually do
yeah,
in the
yeah.
system.
Well,
So
she's in the school, so but yeah, and I think a lot of it got muddied up too with Orem trying to split off or not,
that's a
however they
complicated
botched that.
issue. Let's not open that can of
Yeah.
worms. That's for sure.
Right, but I think there were other issues that impacted those races. But yeah, People hear about the statewide stuff. I mean, I've listened to some nationally syndicated shows that talked about the education bill and the transgender bill in particular, just saying, hey, look, Utah's doing this. And, and yeah, I mean, there's no reason why some forms of some of those policies couldn't have been, passed down or handed out, give people more option at the school district level for their education and what they do with their kids and things like that, and try and come up with programs for the kids that it's not working for. And I know they do some of that. I'm not trying to say that they just ignore it, but they're not strongly motivated to do anything outside of recommendations from the State Board of Education. And so,
the largest single
it gives people a way to do something else is what I like.
Yeah. The largest single motivating force in education policy is unfortunately the teachers union. And interestingly, there's actually something we can do about that this legislative session. Did I share with you, Chuck? There's this bill, and it says that a union, right, a private union, cannot use government resources in order to conduct its business.
Ooh, interesting.
So it's very general, but let's just say that would specifically apply to a teachers union, and government resources would be things like direct withdrawal of union dues from a teacher's paycheck.
Oh, wow.
So if they were unable to do that, the teacher would have to go into the UEA website, set up automatic, withdrawal from their bank account themselves. And it wouldn't be so easy as, just checking a box like, hey, pay the union, make me part of the union.
Right.
They'd have to be more deliberate about it. It also means that they wouldn't be able to use the email list of the teachers to go and lobby them, which, they lobby all teachers, not just members of their union, to go and post things like the Ed Choice bill.
I felt that very personally.
Yeah.
But, they weren't a fan of mine when I ran.
Yeah, absolutely. And, they sent out notifications to not vote for, Charles Wood here. So, I mean, it does make a difference. That's a really important bill that's coming up. I'd actually have to figure out what that number is again. But yeah, we could talk about something else in the meantime. But yeah,
I think it's interesting too, because it also is down to like facilities, right? Because they conduct a lot of their business in the school after hours. And they
correct. So they wouldn't be able to use the facility for free. They'd be completely on their own. But speaking of using facilities for free, and caucuses and conventions, you know how we have like a deal that public facilities, we can use them for political party caucuses, as long as we reserve them ahead of time and we pay for janitorial.
Yeah.
That's now being expanded to higher education. So what that means is that we're going to have a lot more conventions in the Huntsman Center.
Oh, okay.
And UVU. UVU facilities. Like, that's going to do us a world of good. And it only makes sense because we are paying for these institutions with our tax money anyway. So, as long as we reserve it with adequate notice so that, we can get on the schedule, I think that's going to be a really good bill that's going to pass. And I know it's going to pass because it's been unanimous thus far through the House side, both Democrats and Republicans, because Democrats want to use this too.
Yeah, they benefit from it too. Yeah,
exactly. So I think it's a really good bill. Okay, so that bill I was talking about, it's HB 241, labor union amendments, and that means House Bill 241, labor union amendments. And I put parentheses, one of the greatest bills of all time. I truly believe that.
Well, I think the issue that I mostly have with it, and it's not anything against the teachers unions in particular. I mean, they're probably the more egregious example of this, but the one thing is they're a public sector union, which means they've unionized against the taxpayer in order to get better concessions for the teachers. And the other issue is that they don't represent the teachers well. They just go out and support political causes. And so when you see them out doing stuff, I mean, most of the time they're not negotiating on behalf of the teachers. You know, they're not out there saying we need to pay them more. They're not out there telling the districts or the legislature to up allocations of money toward them. They're out there advocating for these other causes that have nothing to do with the teachers' well-being. And so
with this Ed Choice bill, they specifically got a massive raise,
yes,
$8,400. And the union said, we don't want this bill. We don't want them to get this raise. And obviously they can say, okay, well, there was baggage because there was Ed Choice attached to it. But the Ed Choice actually didn't remove any of their funding. In fact, this year they're going to get the largest increase of WPU, even separate from that teacher salary raise, than they've ever gotten before, ever.
Right.
And, you know, I had a lot of teacher friends who were upset that this bill passed. I'm like, hey, at least you're going to get a raise. And the union apparently in their email said, oh, most teachers won't get the raise. I'm like, no.
No, they directly allocated it per teacher.
Yeah, it's going directly to the teacher because, you know, whether they like it or not, the district often keeps a lot of the money if we allocate it to the district, but it's going directly to the teacher. And it's going
I liked that too, by the way.
It's going to all levels of teacher. Like, it's even paying like nurses and therapists that work at the school. So if you think you don't count, you likely do count. You're going to get a lot of money this year, and it's going to be really good for your family. So you won't be able to control what everyone does in educating their child, but as a thank you for letting some people take control of their child's education, they're going to pay you a whole lot more. So I approve.
Yeah, I think it was good all around. It was interesting too because a lot of people have argued, and they argued when I was running for school board too, that the teachers needed to be paid more because they're the teachers. And my argument back was, okay, well, you know, just because they're teachers, right? You can make the same argument for anything, you know, but when you start talking to the teachers and you start seeing some of the impact that COVID and the way that some things have changed, I thought they deserved the raise. The issue was that I thought they deserved the raise because their job was harder and we were asking them to do more than they had been doing before, right? Not because they were teachers, right? And that's the thing is if I'm going to justify spending taxpayer money, I want to justify it, right? And it was justifiable to give the teachers that money.
Yeah, so. And I mean, I come from a background where my wife was a high school English teacher when we met. So, you know,
my mom teaches high school math.
Yeah, I have a lot of teachers in my family. I'm not anti-teacher, you know, and getting this money directly to them, I think was the right thing to do. And I have some more bills that I'm tracking, like covering like postpartum costs and like parental leave for teachers, things like that. I'll support. You know, I just want a little bit more transparency and accountability at the same time. So maybe it comes at a cost.
The state and the districts employ the teachers. They have a responsibility to them to take care of them. And so, you know, if that's a reasonable, hey, we're taking care of the teachers. Yeah, let's do it. But if we can't afford it, or if they're, you know, that's the conversation that I want to have though is, you know, what are all the reasons why we need to do this and what is a reasonable amount to take care of that? So.
Yep. Exactly. So speaking of education, I think it's SB 55. That is a repeat of a bill that they ran last year. It failed last year, even though it's surprisingly innocuous. If you know what scope and sequence is, it's what school districts do, or an LEA does, with standards for curriculum, and
Okay.
they're kind of more high level standards. So it's not determining exactly what curriculum or materials that a teacher uses in their classroom, but this allows the scope and sequence district-wide curriculum to be voted on in a public vote by the school board. And so the public is able to see that before it gets adopted, and it gets more people involved, right? It gets the stakeholders involved, and then you can go to the school board meeting, speak for or against it, and then the school board needs to vote on it in a public vote. So then they're accountable
Right.
to what's being taught in the school. And that passed committee this year. That's called SB 55, Public School Instructional Material Requirements for the nerds. Last year it was SB 114. And a lot of people got it confused with the other bill that people hated, which was that like teachers had to publish what they taught at the end of the week online. So yeah, that's not coming back this year, and that's not what this is. This is just district-wide curriculum. So I'm glad that has support now. It was just not a good environment to get that passed last year.
Yeah. That's interesting. Anything that you can do to improve transparency and just make people feel like they know what's going on.
Ooh, okay. Speaking of transparency, this actually has to do with schools too. The Open and Public Meetings Act amendments. That's HB 21, and this is actually run by a Democrat, Briscoe, this year. But last year it was run by Brady Brammer. And this didn't pass last year, but this me and Chuck have had experience with this. But
right. So
this requires an open meeting
people,
to. Yeah.
I just want to give people some context. So
yeah, go ahead.
So the Open Public Meetings Act is something that we had to get trained on every year as part of the charter school board. And so it just basically tells you the rules. You have to notify with certain ways, certain amount of time before you hold a meeting. You have to conduct, certain any business except for a handful of exceptions in a public open meeting so that people know what you're doing. You have to post public minutes. We recorded our meetings and posted those. I can't remember if that was by law or just a good idea. But yeah, so that's effectively what we're talking about here is, how public entities conduct business or public business.
You have to allow people into the meeting. This bill adds another level, and you're required to allow public comment. And you might have thought, oh, if I go to a public meeting, I can give public comment. Actually, they're not required to let you. Most school boards do allow you to give public comment, but for a while, Davis School District was only allowing it once a month or every other month. Wow. and it's always kind of a threat that's looming over you. Sometimes if you go and give public comment that's critical of the job that an elected board or office is doing, they'll say, well, I don't need to give you public comment, so we might just take it away if you're unruly or if you criticize me. But I think that's part of the democratic process. I think you need to take the heat, no matter how ridiculous people are, and you gotta allow them to speak. So this bill does that, and I'm glad that it has bipartisan support this time. And it's just one of those things. Last year, school boards were sick and tired of people complaining about COVID regulations in school, and they're like, no, please don't take away that bargaining chip, because we like to threaten the people that we're going to take away their public comment. Which I think is not cool. But yeah, HB 21, another good bill.
Well, so the other issue that here, and having been a board chair of a public body that had to abide by these rules, part of it is whether or not you let people speak. But what I don't think a lot of people really understand is that most of the public entities at this point, they record their meetings. Alpine School District does. The charter school that I was on the board for did and still does. right? And so it's out there for people to see it if they want to see what happened at the school board meeting. But the other thing is that it also winds up in the minutes and is public record. So if you want to go in and object, you are publicly objecting, and it goes on the public ledger for the organization that you're going and commenting on. And yeah, sometimes nobody's going to go back and listen to what you had to say, but I have seen some of these things actually get some momentum because somebody stood up in one meeting and then somebody stood up in the next meeting, and then it turned out to be a major issue. And so it's more than just what Alpine School District does that drives me crazy with their public comment is they start the timer and they stare at you and then say thank you when you're done and don't, barely acknowledge that you spoke, but
Yeah,
in a lot of cases,
and I think,
it really is a venue that you can make a difference in.
and I think the next level to this transparency and right to redress of grievances would be to take away the provisions in some of these policies that say that you cannot directly address like a board member or an employee. They try to do that to maintain civility, and I'm actually a fan of maintain civility because I think that's more effective. But if I had a board member that I think voted the wrong way or is not doing the job that we elected them to do, I want to be able to directly criticize them without saying, "Oh, we're going to get the sergeant at arms to take you away. Don't say we're doing a bad job." I don't know. It seems kind of tyrannical in a way. Like, I know the legislature doesn't do that, but the school boards definitely do. And so I'd like a state law that actually said you can't have a policy against people criticizing board members.
Well, and that seems like it would be a constitutional issue. And some people are thinking the freedom of speech, but what I'm thinking is the right to address your grievances to the government. If you have an issue with a government employee or official, you should be able to directly address them in a public meeting, and they should be required to let you say it, right? As long as you're not threatening them or anything crazy like that, right?
I think that's what they sign up for. So speaking of So speaking of issues in education, did you see that undercover video they did in Utah? The accuracy in media video?
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's this YouTube video done by a group I hadn't heard of before called Accuracy in Media. They seem similar to Project Veritas, but they went undercover and they spoke to a number of different school officials and administrators in Utah. And the great thing about it is it confirmed what I already knew about a lot of these people that I've met, talked to personally. And it's just eye-opening for a lot of people that, they talk specifically about teaching, principles of critical race theory, but just calling it something different, and that there was a loophole in our rule on the state board level that allows them to do that, which is unfortunate because there is. And that's something we need to address in Utah. We still have critical race theory in Utah because we haven't taken solid action against it. We haven't created a policy with any teeth or any accountability, and teachers still do it. So like my nephew, he was told that he was inherently racist because of the color of his skin. I don't think that's right to tell little kids that, and I don't think it's true either. Even if the teacher thinks it's true, that's like not their place to share that opinion, and tell the kids that's what they should think, right? He was also taught that cops killed people basically for fun, especially black kids. They would just go out and kill black kids, and I don't think that there's data to support that. I think every unjust killing is wrong, and we can talk about police brutality, but I don't think we should be making stereotypes that are factually inaccurate and politically biased. And so that still occurs in our state because we haven't taken action. And so that's something tangible that we can do, as listeners to the program. is that we can contact our state school board members and say, hey, our rule, our critical race theory rule, whatever you want to call it, you can call it R277328 if you want. I'm dorky enough that I know that
That's
number.
pretty specific.
It is. It's called the Educational Equity in Schools rule. It doesn't sound like a rule that would prohibit CRT, does it? It
Nope.
doesn't. Yeah, R277328, and tell your state school board member, not your local school board, state school board, that we need to revisit this rule and we need to stop teachers from doing this because it's the minority of teachers, right? Like, I honestly think that most teachers are trying to do their best. They're doing a good job, and they're frustrated because they feel like they're getting a bad rap because some minority of teachers is deciding that their job is for activism instead of for education, right? Like, it's their job to teach moral values to these children instead of their parents, which, I fundamentally disagree with.
Well, the other thing is, because you mentioned go to your state school board member and talk to them. And I completely agree. But the other thing is, and I don't think people really understand this, is that most of the school districts and school boards take their lead from the State Board of Education, and so they won't do anything above and beyond what the state board does. The other thing that they don't know is that most of these boards can do that, right? They can't pass policies that contradict the state school board, and they can't pass policies that contradict state law. But they can go above and beyond in a lot of ways as long as they're not violating the rights of their students or teachers. And so they could pass a policy that does close this loophole and say, we're not going to tolerate it here in this district. And then unless the legislature or the state school board change the rules, that'll stand. And they can make that actionable, and they can make it a fireable offense. They have that power. And so, go talk to your state school boards, but then go look at the people on your local school board and make sure that they're willing to take action on these things as well, because a lot of these folks aren't willing to stand up. And if you can give them enough support, or, let them know that you're, start a movement, start talking to your neighbors, you start getting some of this rolling. Maybe some of them want to do this or are willing to do this, but they're not willing to spend the political capital. But if you, their constituents, get enough of a movement going, then you may be able to get them to do it anyway.
Well, and I think that's the point. You need enough people, you need enough pressure in order to move that needle the right direction. So, for instance, exactly what you were talking about, Chuck. So in Davis School Board, they do a lot of things wrong. In fact, they might be one of the worst in the state, but they did one single thing right. And they formed a policy that you could not have ideological symbols up in your classroom. You couldn't have anything indicating, political opinion or moral ideology, right?
Right.
So I could go up and put a big cross in my classroom, which you figure, of course, you're not going to do that. But similarly, I couldn't, hang up a Black Lives Matter flag because it represents that organization, which is very partisan and political. And so they formed that policy, even though on the state board level, they refused to pass that policy.
Right.
So unfortunately, at the state level, we don't have a blanket policy, but, there's a couple different school boards in the state that do have that better policy, and they actually did take action. Unfortunately, Davis School Board doesn't do as well with some of the other issues, but we could talk about that in another episode.
Yeah, and that's the other thing just to keep in mind is that they may pass the policy, and then they may not enforce it. So you still have to hold their feet to the fire. And I've seen that on a number of issues in a number of places. So yeah, just keep that in mind.
We talked a lot about education. You also mentioned what you were calling the transgender bill. But I think you're referring to SB 16, which is the moratorium on on gender, quote unquote gender affirming surgery, right?
Right.
So if a kid has gender dysphoria and they're under the age of 18, there's now a moratorium saying, starting now, you can no longer start on puberty blockers or cross-sex hormones,
Right.
and then surgery before the age of 18 is just banned across the board. And this is something that's been in the works for actually like 4 years in Utah now.
Oh yeah.
It's been a really heavy lift, and they're finally getting it passed this year, and I think a lot of that is some of the other things that are happening nationally. But my senator Mike Kennedy is the one who ran this bill, and we spoke a little bit about this before session.
He's so awesome.
Oh, he's so awesome, and he's a doctor, and so he has clout in the arena of medical treatment. And he brought up a good point, right? Like, even if you're taking something that's bad for you, and maybe you're addicted to it, or you're dependent on it, like if you stop using that cold turkey, it could be bad for you. It could open up the state to lawsuits if, if that happens to be cross-sex hormones, like you quit using testosterone and you lose your mind, which is actually a very real possibility. So he said, anyone who's already started this, you can continue to do it. You still can't get surgery before you're 18, but you can continue to do this. But anybody new, we're gonna end this, right? We're done doing the sex changes on minors, and I think that's just such a good thing. We had 6 minor females in 2016 that were taking testosterone for transition purposes. So not very many, right, out of our total population. And that went up into the 800, around 50 minor girls per year were on testosterone.
Oh wow!
As of last year, and so quite a lot. It's gone up 10,000%, and we can pick our guesses on why that's happening. But that's a 10,000% increase in the amount of minor females of our state that are now not going to be able to have children. And making that serious of a decision is very difficult. Even with your parents' approval, there's things in a state that we don't let parents approve of before you're 18. Like, you can't get parental consent to go skydiving before you're 18. You can't get parental consent to join the military before you're 18, or to smoke or to drink. I think if you're over 16, you can get parental consent to get a tattoo. But anyway.
No, but it makes sense. I mean, all the things you're talking about have long-term consequences that ultimately I could imagine kids saying, coming to the point where they realize that this wasn't going to get them where they wanted to go, but you can't reverse it at that point. And so, just making sure that they're at least adults, right, legally, before they start making these decisions makes a lot of sense, because then at that point, I still don't think they're mature enough to make those decisions, but yeah.
But I think when you're an adult, you're allowed to make terrible decisions.
Right. You're allowed to make decisions that have long-term costs for you.
Exactly. And so along those same lines, there was a couple of other bills. I don't know where. I think it was SB 73. I'll have to find that one. There was one that said that you couldn't change your sex on your birth certificate until you were 18 if it was for the purpose of transitioning. Nothing in terms of mistakes made or intersex, or anything like that. Any other reason why you would need to change your birth certificate. But there was a good bill on that, and that was run by Senator Dan McKay, And then SB 100 was really good in its first iteration, but now it's been completely gutted. They passed it, but it means nothing anymore. So the original bill said that
That's always
basically
sad.
the original bill said basically teachers can't keep secrets about your kid's sexuality and gender identity and what name you're calling them or what pronouns you're using. You can't keep that from the parent.
Right.
And I know that teachers like to think that they're better than parents and that they're going to, like, you know, protect the child. That's not their job.
Well,
like they can,
and
they
again,
can,
it's not the majority.
yeah, I mean, you're right. Some teachers, for some reason, because I saw a lot of them testify, and they're like, you know, I don't want to. I want this to be a secret between me and the kid, and I'm like, but the parents don't want that.
Yeah.
That's not what the parents want. We want to know what's going on at school, and
they have ultimate responsibility for those kids.
Yeah, and especially if you're having a conversation, teacher and student, about sexuality. Just not appropriate.
Yeah, right. No. Yeah.
So anyway, but they changed it to, the parent has the right to request the child's educational record, and that's it now. That's what the final iteration of the bill was, and that just means that, you know, if they change it on the school record, now you would know if your child changed their name. Yeah, it's frustrating.
Yeah, I know.
But you know what I was told. I was told they had to do that because there's some new federal regulation through the Department of Ed that they passed when Biden started that would actually conflict. It actually requires you to keep secrets from parents, which is very frustrating. So sorry to bring it back to national, but there's things we can't do on a state level because of what Biden did on national level.
Yeah. Well, and that kind of crossover, I think, is fine for this show. It's just, it's down to, you know, I'm not going to complain about the national issues on their own just because I'm pissed off about them. But I think that's interesting. The other thing that I'm curious about, though, is that if there's some national rule that was passed under the Biden administration, we're finding out that passed means there was an executive order, or there was legislative action, or some committee in some department somewhere decided that this was how it was. Do you know which of those it was?
It was executive department. It's an administrative rule.
But my deal is I would love to see the legislature actually pass a state law, knowing that it conflicted with an executive order or some rule from some department, and fight it out. Because we can't keep taking these blows to our sovereignty as a state and to, you know, what we deem to be right here in Utah, just because we don't want to fight the federal government. And, you know, especially given the climate with the Supreme Court, I think some of these are winnable. And I think some of these would set precedent for other things that we can then say, yeah, we're not playing this game with you either.
So we've been on for a while. Can I mention at least one more bill along the same
do
topic
one
here?
more, and then we'll...
One more.
Yeah.
I told you I had 64.
And then we'll give people a call to action.
Yeah, well, this is a call to action. This is actually for tomorrow, but it'll probably be too late by the time people watch it. Hey, so HB2, but there's still more to do after, because there's 4 votes on every bill and then 1 signature.
Right.
HB 228, it's called Unprofessional Conduct Amendments. And I don't know if anyone remembers this in the news, but in 2020, even before the election of Spencer Cox to replace Gary Herbert, in the 2020 legislative session, there was a bill that was going through to prohibit conversion therapy. And, you know, that's bipartisan support. I don't think anyone likes conversion therapy per se. But in their definition of this practice, they included all non-affirmative talk therapy, including for gender identity.
Right.
So even if someone came in and maybe they're not, you know, struggling with their sexuality, maybe they know what their sexuality is, but they also don't want to act on it, heterosexually or homosexually or otherwise, their therapist would be unable to give them direction in order to maybe not give into desires, right?
Right.
And because that would be considered conversion therapy under our law.
Okay.
The interesting thing is that bill didn't pass, but they passed an administrative rule through the Department of Occupational Licensure, and the person who was pushing for this was
this drives me
Spencer
nuts.
Cox. So Spencer Cox got this passed through the Department of Occupational Licensure with the same language as the original bill that failed in committee. And the problem is it prohibits any non-affirmative therapy for kids with gender dysphoria. So the only legal means by which a psychotherapist can counsel your child who has gender dysphoria is to say, well, you should probably transition. And if you're a parent who disagrees with that, you're not in much luck. And I actually know 3 parents I'm friends with that have a child who's experiencing gender dysphoria, and they can't take that child to a therapist because they don't want the therapist to tell them to transition. They want to wait until they're adults and see how they're feeling at that moment. So this bill allows for that. HB 228, it's in committee tomorrow, the House Business and Labor Committee at 3:40. That's on the 1st of February. But as I said, this will probably be over and hopefully have passed committee by then. You can contact your House representative, your Senate representative, members of the Senate Business and Labor Committee to encourage them to vote for this bill. This is not trying to say that we want conversion therapy. We just want to be able to do watchful waiting for kids with gender dysphoria. So I think that's a good bill because, heaven forbid I would have to deal with that in the future. I mean, all my kids are little now, but I would want other options besides the heterodox option that most people are practicing right now.
Right. No, that makes total sense. So I'm just going to throw in a few other things just to help people along with this, right? So, we're probably going to get this up tomorrow, which means that, you may not have a chance to, head up to Salt Lake or jump on a Zoom call and tell them what you think. But, assuming it gets through the committee, the way you find out who your representative is in order to get in contact with them, you can go to precinctportal.org, right?
Yeah, you go to Precinct Portal.
And you just put in your address, and it'll tell you who your representatives are. It'll tell you all the way down to some of your local folks.
Yeah, you'll go to the precinct locator, and it'll tell you all your federal representatives, your state school board, your commissioners, your state senator, state house member. For legislative session, you're primarily concerned with state house and state senate, and it allows you to call them or email them. Has all those options right there.
Yep, exactly.
Precinctportal.org.
Yep. So at that point, you just call them up and let them know what you think.
Yeah,
it's real easy. Yep. And one thing that I've after talking to a few folks that I know in the legislature, Corey Malloy is my House rep guy. But I actually went to high school with Brady Brammer, and I know a few other folks up there that I've been able to talk to. If they get a lot of calls, that's not normal for them. And so if you and you can get a bunch of your neighbors to call them up, you may be able to make them sweat a little bit if they're thinking about voting a different way.
Leave a message. I mentioned that. You got to treat people the way you want to be treated. Like if you hear somebody just start off really hostile and calling names for no reason that you don't even know, you're going to hang up on them, right?
Yep.
That's what's going to happen. But you yeah, as I said, I help out Pro Life Utah, and we will lobby in favor of pro-life bills. And we've had some of the bills in session this year that we've sent out like 300 some odd emails about, and been really successful at getting it through each level of the legislature. So, 300 on national level means jack squat. You have to get like 50,000 messages
Mm-hmm.
to a congressional member before they care. But at the local level, you can make a really big difference just by, getting your friends and family to help
Yep.
you support or oppose a bill.
Yep. So yeah, so that's the call to action is, go check, see if the bill made it through committee, and then call up your legislator. What was the bill number again?
HB 228, Unprofessional Conduct Amendments.
All right. Well, I guess we'll just wrap it up here. This was fun, and hopefully we can dive into some more stuff next week and give people another idea of how they can reach out and make a difference in these areas.